The envelope was still sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home from my morning walk. It had my name on it, just Dad, written in my son's handwriting. Not a card, not a letter, a legal document. I stood there in my work boots, still damp from the dew on the grass, and I read it twice, then a third time, because I kept thinking I was misreading something. I wasn't. It was a power of attorney form, signed, or rather forged, with my name at the bottom, dated 3 weeks prior, authorizing my son and his wife to manage all financial decisions on my behalf, effective immediately, on account of my diminished cognitive capacity. Diminished cognitive capacity. I'm 64 years old. I coached Little League for 11 years. I rewired the entire electrical panel in this house myself. I read the Wall Street Journal every Sunday morning and can still do the crossword in pen. But according to that document, I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. I folded the paper, put it back in the envelope, set it on the counter right where I found it. Then I went to the garage, sat down on my old shop stool, and I didn't move for about 20 minutes. That was the day I understood that the people I loved most had been planning something I never saw coming. My name is Earl Beaumont. I spent 31 years as a licensed electrician in Memphis, Tennessee, started as an apprentice right out of high school, worked my way up to running my own crew, and eventually opened a small contracting business that I built from nothing. Nothing fancy. A white van, 2 good employees, a reputation that spread mostly by word of mouth, but it was mine. I built it the same way I built everything in my life. Slow, steady, and without cutting corners. My wife June passed 9 years ago, ovarian cancer. She was 53. We had 1 son together. I'll call him my son because that's what he was to me, even when he stopped acting like it. He was 31 when all of this happened. Married to a woman I'll call my daughter-in-law, who had been in the picture for about 4 years by then. I liked her when they first got together. She was sharp, organized. My son had always been a little scattered, and she seemed to settle him. They got married in a small ceremony outside Nashville, and I cried at the reception, the embarrassing kind of crying, because June wasn't there to see it. After June passed, I sold my business and retired. I didn't need to, I could have kept going, but something went out of me when she died, and I didn't trust myself to run a crew with that kind of weight on my chest. I sold to my foreman, a good man who'd been with me for 12 years, got a fair price. Between that and June's life insurance and my pension, I was comfortable, not wealthy, comfortable. The house was paid off. I had a solid amount set aside. I didn't need much. My son knew all of this. We'd talked about it openly. He'd seen the accounts. He knew what the business sold for. He knew what my pension paid out every month, and somewhere in those conversations, something shifted in him that I didn't see. He and my daughter-in-law had been struggling financially for a few years. I knew that much. They'd bought a house they couldn't quite afford in a neighborhood that was nicer than their income. She'd started a business that hadn't taken off. They had credit card debt. I didn't know how much, but I'd heard it mentioned in passing, the way people mention a headache they're hoping will go away on its own. I helped when I could. I paid for their vacation 1 year, a week in the Outer Banks. I gave them money when their furnace went out. I sent a check when they had their first child, my grandson, a boy I loved from the moment I held him. I never asked to be paid back. I never kept a tally. That's not how I was raised, and it's not how I raised my son. But at some point, Dad helps out when things get hard became something else in their minds. I don't know exactly when it happened. I wasn't there for that conversation. All I know is what I eventually found out. My daughter-in-law had been telling people, her mother, her friends, eventually my son, that I was slipping, that I'd repeat myself on phone calls, that I seemed confused about dates, that once when she came over to drop off my grandson, I'd left the stove on. I did leave the stove on once. I was making chili and got distracted watching a football game. I'm 64, not 84, and it happened once, but she told that story more than once, and each time it grew. My son started calling more frequently after that, asking questions. How was I feeling? Was I sleeping okay? Had I thought about whether the house might be hutched too much for me to manage alone? It sounded like concern. I took it as concern. I told him I was fine, and I meant it. I didn't know he'd already spoken to an attorney. His name was a man I'd never met. Their attorney, not mine. Apparently, my son had gone to him asking about options for managing an elderly parent's finances when that parent was showing signs of cognitive decline. The attorney had drawn up the power of attorney form. My son had signed his portion. My daughter-in-law had signed as witness. And this is the part that still makes my jaw tighten when I think about it. They'd forged my signature. They had a sample. My son had an old birthday card I'd signed and a canceled check from when I helped with the furnace. Enough to work from. I don't know which one of them actually did it. I've never asked directly because it doesn't matter. They both knew. They both agreed. That's what I have to live with. The plan, as I later pieced it together, was straightforward. Once the power of attorney was filed and accepted, they intended to move my retirement accounts into a joint account they controlled. The house would go next, a quiet sale, listed just under market value to move quickly, with the proceeds going somewhere I wouldn't see. The story they'd tell anyone who asked was that I'd agreed to it, that I'd been confused for a while, that the family had stepped in, that it was all very sad but handled with love, and then they'd set me up in a one-bedroom apartment in a complex about 40 minutes from Memphis. They'd already toured it. I found the brochure in my son's jacket pocket when I was hanging it up one afternoon during a visit. One of those glossy senior living brochures with a smiling gray-haired man on the cover and language like supportive community and peace of mind for families. I put the jacket back. I didn't say anything, but I started paying closer attention. I have a friend, been my friend since we were both in our 20s, worked together on a job site in 1987, and we've had breakfast together at the same diner almost every Saturday since. I'll call him my old friend. He's 71 now, sharp as a tack, and he spent 30 years as a paralegal before he retired. When I showed him the power of attorney form, he read it the way I'd read a wiring diagram, slow, careful, looking for what didn't belong. He found 3 things. First, the notarization was off. The stamp was real, but the notary listed hadn't worked in Tennessee for 2 years. My son had apparently found the stamp somewhere, or had help finding it, and used a name that wasn't current. Second, the medical documentation required for this type of POA in Tennessee had not been attached. You can't declare cognitive incapacity on a form alone. You need a physician's assessment. There wasn't one. Third, and most important, the signature wasn't mine. My old friend had looked at enough documents to know. The pen pressure was wrong. The way I make my capital E is distinctive. The signature on that form made it correctly, but the A in Beaumont curved the wrong direction. He looked at me across the diner table, over 2 cups of coffee that had gone cold. "Earl," he said, "you need to make some calls before they do." I nodded. I already knew who to call. I had used an estate attorney once before when June passed. Her name was a woman I'd worked with twice, and she was exactly the kind of attorney you want when things get serious. Quiet, thorough, and not easily impressed by paperwork that doesn't hold up. I called her that same afternoon and explained everything. She listened without interrupting. That's one of the things I respected about her. When I finished, she said 2 things. "Don't confront them yet," and "we're going to file first." What happened over the next 6 weeks, I'll try to explain without losing you in the legal details, because the details matter, but they're not the point. We filed a complaint with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Unit, citing the forged signature, the fraudulent notarization, and the attempted elder financial exploitation, which is a specific crime in Tennessee, a felony, carrying real penalties. My attorney also sent a formal letter to the financial institutions where my accounts were held, flagging the fraudulent POA and placing a freeze on any transfer requests tied to that document. We moved my primary accounts. I won't say where, but they moved. The house, my house, The house I'd bought in 1994, where my son had his own room until he was 22, and where June and I had spent the best years of our lives together, I had it retitled with a specific legal protection that made any unauthorized sale essentially impossible without my physical, notarized, in-person consent. My attorney explained it clearly. If someone tries to sell this house without you standing in the room and signing in front of a licensed notary, it won't go through. Then we waited. My son called on a Tuesday evening. He said he and my daughter-in-law had been talking, and they thought it was time to have a conversation about my future. He asked if they could come over Saturday morning. I said yes. I said it was a great idea, actually, that I'd been thinking the same thing. They arrived at 9. I had coffee made. My grandson wasn't with them, which told me they'd planned for this to be a serious conversation. My daughter-in-law had a folder, a green one, and she set it on the kitchen table with the careful energy of someone who has rehearsed what comes next. My son started. He said he'd noticed some things that concerned him. Little things, he said, the stove, repeating himself on calls. He was worried. They both were, and they'd looked into some options, and they thought. I stopped him. I picked up the envelope from the counter. The same one I'd found 3 weeks earlier. I slid it across the table. "Is this what you were going to talk about?" I asked. My daughter-in-law's face went very still. "Because I had it looked at," I said, "and the notary seal is fraudulent. The physician's assessment that Tennessee requires for this kind of document doesn't exist, and the signature at the bottom isn't mine." The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something. My son said, "Dad, we were just trying to—" "I know what you were trying to do," I said. I wasn't shouting. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive way. I was something colder than angry. I was done. "I've already filed a complaint," I said. "The accounts are frozen against that document. The house is protected, and there's an attorney involved who is considerably better at this than whoever you hired." My daughter-in-law looked at my son. My son looked at the table. "What I want to know," I said, "is how long you've been planning this." Nobody answered. They left about 40 minutes later. My daughter-in-law was crying, not the sorry kind, the scared kind. My son couldn't look at me on his way out. He stopped at the door for a moment, like he was going to say something, and then he didn't. I sat back down at the kitchen table after they were gone. I poured what was left of my coffee down the drain because it had gone cold. I stood at the sink and looked out at the backyard, at the garden I'd built for June, the one I still tend every spring because I can't bring myself not to, and I let myself feel it. Not the anger, the grief. Because this wasn't a stranger who'd tried to take from me. This was my son. I had coached his little league team. I had driven him to the emergency room when he broke his arm, falling out of a tree at age 9. I had sat in the second pew at his wedding and cried embarrassing tears because I was so proud of the man I thought he'd become. And somewhere along the way, something had gotten into him. Desperation, maybe, his wife's influence, the slow erosion that happens when debt piles up and you start looking around for an easier answer. I don't know. I may never know. But I grieved it. I gave myself that Saturday to grieve it. The investigation moved on its own timeline after that. I won't pretend it was fast, because it wasn't. These things take months, and the wheels of it were largely out of my hands. What I can tell you is what came of it. The attorney they'd hired was contacted by the TBI. It turned out he hadn't known the signature was forged. He'd been given the signed form after the fact and had filed it in good faith. He cooperated fully and was not charged. I believed him. My son and my daughter-in-law were a different matter. The investigation confirmed the forgery. The fraudulent notarization was traced. They'd paid someone $100 in cash for it, which is both illegal and frankly embarrassing. Elder financial exploitation charges were filed. Their attorney negotiated, as attorneys do. What they ultimately faced, I won't detail here, because the legal process is ongoing as I tell this. What I can tell you is this: they did not get the house. They did not get the accounts. They did not get to write the story of me as a confused old man who needed to be managed. I still see my grandson. That part took some careful navigating, and there were weeks when I didn't know how it would go. But I have an attorney now who understands what I want, which is not to blow up my son's life entirely, only to stop what he was doing, and access to my grandson was something we protected explicitly. He's 4. He calls me Pop Pop. He has June's eyes, which is a thing I'll carry with me until I can't carry anything anymore. My old friend and I still have breakfast on Saturday mornings. Last week, he ordered the same thing he's been ordering for 30 years. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, coffee black, and he asked me how I was doing. Really doing. I'm okay, I told him. I'm better than okay. He nodded, didn't push. That's why we've been friends for 40 years. I'm telling this story because I want people to hear it. Not to humiliate my son, though I understand if you think he deserves it, but because what happened to me happens to people every day. To fathers and mothers who trusted their children, to grandparents who spent their lives building something and never imagined that the threat would come from inside the house. The documents that govern your finances and your property and your legal standing, read them. Every word. If someone hands you something to sign, you have the right to take it home. Read it overnight. Have someone you trust look at it. You have the right to say, "I'll get back to you." You have the right to call your own attorney before you sign anything with your name on it. That right doesn't expire at 60. It doesn't expire at 80. And if you're the one being asked to sign, know this. In Tennessee and in most states, a power of attorney for medical or financial decisions requires proper documentation, proper witnesses, and in many cases, a physician's assessment. A form alone isn't enough. A forged signature isn't enough. And the people who try to tell you otherwise are counting on you not knowing that. I knew. Or rather, I found out in time. That's the difference. There's a detail I've been holding back because I wasn't sure how to say it. When I confronted my son and daughter-in-law that Saturday morning, when I slid that envelope across the table, I hadn't told them what I'd done. They didn't know about the TBI complaint. They didn't know about the account freeze. They didn't know any of it because my attorney had advised me to say nothing until we were ready. So when I told them, when I watched my daughter-in-law's face go still and my son looked down at the table he'd eaten dinner at 1,000 times growing up in that house, I wasn't afraid. That's what surprised me most. I thought I'd be afraid. I thought I'd be shaking. I wasn't. I was calm because I had done what I was supposed to do. I had protected what June and I built together. I had made sure that the house was still mine, and the accounts were still mine, and my name was still mine. They left. I poured my coffee down the drain. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at June's garden, and then I went outside and pulled a few weeds because it was a Saturday morning and the tomatoes needed tending, and that's what I do. That's what I've always done.